Okay, so
So the next thing I made is I made a list of 5 Forgotten Realms books.
okay, your top 5 is
These
it?
are they my top 5? I don't know.
Or like most recommended 5?
These are the ones I'm recommending.
Right.
And the idea is if you want to get a bit of extra flavour, if you want to see what really are sort of the gems of the Forgotten Realms, I have come up with 5 things that I think are good. So, because there's so many Forgotten Realms things, I haven't read all the books. I haven't played all the computer games.
No, yeah, there's so many. But you've played what's it called? Baldur's Gate.
And that's one of my recommendations.
Ah, okay.
My first recommendation, which just got re-released, is Baldur's Gate. Go for the enhanced edition because it's the one that just came out.
Wait, so you've played 1 and 2, right? But there's a new,
So there's
or is it
1 and
Icewind
2.
Dale? Sorry, I
So
confused.
yeah, there's Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and then 3 is a different storyline that's just about to come out. So I'm not commenting on 3.
Okay.
Don't know anything about it. But 1 and 2, you start off as this very nothing character, and then you wind up by the end becoming a huge epic level character who shapes the destiny of the Forgotten Realms. It's a story that's intimately tied into the ongoing developing storyline of the Forgotten Realms. Baldur's Gate 1 is a bit more simplistic. It's very much you have a quest, you discover that behind that evil there was actually another bigger evil, and so on and so on and so on until you finally get to the big boss. Baldur's Gate 2, on the other hand, is the best Dungeons and Dragons computer game I've ever played.
Cool.
Not that I've ever actually finished the thing, but the storyline is bigger and more developed. There's a lot more space to explore. There's a lot more freedom. You get a stronghold, which is really cool.
Oh, sweet.
And there's a different personalized stronghold for every class. And so if you're a
cool.
fighter, you take over a castle and then you run this castle. If you're a wizard, you get an arcane sanctum between playing. If you're a bard, you get a theatre and have to put on plays.
How have I not played this?
It's so good.
Sounds really cool.
There's lots of fun characters involved, who some of whom, like Minsk, the psychotic ranger with his miniature giant space hamster companion, has become a legend. He's now the star of his own spin-off comic book series in 5th edition. But also because they were meant to be a sort of gateway introduction, a lot of the important Forgotten Realms characters will wind up having cameos in it, and that makes it a really good introduction to what the world is like.
Totally.
And to a lot of the places in the Sword Coast area, one of the many highly developed regions in the Forgotten Realms. And they're a lot of fun. During the lockdown, I finally completed Baldur's Gate 1. When I tried before, back in the day, there was some sort of bug that meant there was a particular cutscene video that when it played, this was right at the end of the game, it played the cutscene video and then it just replayed it on a loop.
Oh,
and so I couldn't get past that point and I never finished.
But the enhanced
And
edition
then
fixed
with
it.
the enhanced editions, I managed to do it again, and I still remember my party from back in the day being more powerful than my party now. I remember they were just
more time.
steamrolling through things. But
You get
anyway,
more
I
time,
managed
don't
to win that. So that's our computer game recommendation. For a campaign setting, I'm going to recommend going back to the original source and going for the original 1st edition grey box Forgotten Realms campaign setting, which you can find as a PDF really easily.
Right.
The reason why, I feel that with all of these big campaign settings, it's really easy to get lost in the detail. And so this is back when the Forgotten Realms was fresh and new and hadn't been described in exhaustive detail.
Right.
It's the one that I think is closest to Ed Greenwood's original vision.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say.
And it has things in it like there's an entire country where they say, we will not ever publish any product set in this country. They have, of course, since then published lots of stuff and fleshed it out entirely, and then blown it up again. And then,
oh my goodness.
But the point was that there were deliberately these empty spaces. There were things like there was a giant desert in the middle of the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
Where now we know the entire story about what happened to it. We've got the full explanation. But back then it was just there's a giant desert in the middle of the world. Why is this? Nobody knows. Something to do with magic. And I kind of like that more.
Sure.
And so I think it's a great way to get an overview of the whole thing, get the flavour, without the exhaustive detail. Now, if you do like that sort of more encyclopedia approach, then I recommend the 3rd edition campaign setting, which is a very exhaustive. In fact, I know for sort of the serious Forgotten Realms game, as the 3rd edition role-playing books are generally very highly regarded.
Right.
And Ed Greenwood was very upset that the world changed to 4th edition because he said he wasn't finished.
Ah.
He wanted to keep writing for 3rd edition. He was having so much fun. My next recommendation for a source book, also by Ed Greenwood, is Volo's Guide to Waterdeep. And Volo's Guide to the North, Volo's Guide to the Dale Lands, Volo's Guide to etc. etc.
What tradition is...
So these were written for 2nd edition, but they have no game statistics in them at all.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, I think there's like, there'll be like one spell or one monster in the back of them just so there'd be something in them. But the whole idea is that Volo is this traveling raconteur, storyteller, travel guide writer who gets everything wrong.
Aww.
And so they're annotated by Al Minster, who makes snarky comments throughout them.
Oh, okay.
But they say in them that Al Minster laughed uproariously when he read certain sections, and that some of the things that Volo says are completely wrong. And the whole idea of this is that it's an in-universe guide that tells you where to travel, what the highlights are, what the attractions are. It rates all the taverns in the different towns, but it is explicitly wrong in some details which are not specified, so that you, as the GM, can just say, no, that's not right, I'm just going to change that.
Wow.
Volo got that wrong, which is a great approach.
That's cool.
So as a result, it goes into a lot of detail. It gives you the flavour of the different taverns or the different
I have to
inns,
ask.
dungeons, whatever. Yes?
Volo's Guide to Monsters, the 5th edition book. Have they done the same thing?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay,
Yes.
good.
And so this series is so well received, that's why Volo got to come back for 5th edition.
Okay, right.
After 4th edition, in 4th edition they did the giant time skip and killed off virtually all the NPCs. And then in 5th edition, they brought back the most iconic and popular ones. Volo got to come back.
Oh.
I don't think they ever said why, he just did. He's a really fun character.
Okay.
And I know some of my friends really like Volo.
Alright.
Because you can pretty much just do anything with him. He's a deliberately ridiculous character. But he's a lot of fun. And those books are a great introduction to the world.
Sounds like a cad.
But
What's
a
next?
lovable cat.
Yeah. What's next?
My next recommendation is a novel.
Oh, cool. Alright,
Yep.
what do we got?
So, The Forgotten Realms, with its 300 odd novels, has a lot of terrible novels. There's some real clunkers, but there are also some really good ones. And for my money, best author that The Forgotten Realms ever had was Elaine Cunningham.
Yeah.
She wrote a number of series. They're all good, but my favourite one, the most iconic one, is the Songs and Swords series, and the first book is Elf Shadow. So, Elf Shadow is the story of Arelyn Moonblade, who is a half-elf assassin. Really, though, she's an adventurer, and she gets a lot of adventures where she has to go and challenge someone to a duel, and because she's a swords person of considerable skill, and so she's got this sort of reputation as a result. And she teams up with the biggest wastrel and incompetent wizard in the Forgotten Realms, Dana Lothan, who's a noble from Waterdeep, who is a complete airhead ladies' man.
Oh my gosh.
And the whole thing is an act.
Oh.
It is a cover, and he's much more intelligent and onto it than he looks.
Cool.
And he winds her up in particular ways that makes her... They've got a really nice dynamic going on.
Cool.
Oh, he's a self-styled bard as well, and awful poetry. He tries to invent his own spells, they're awful. But he's actually a very clever, insightful person, and he's related to one of the big movers and shakers. She, meanwhile, winds up being connected to a lot of elven politics, and so it winds up really getting into a lot of the broader scale stuff. Elaine Cunningham is great at writing characters. Both Arelyn and Danilo are really interesting, deep, complex characters, as well as their enemies, frenemy, Elaith Cruelnober, who is a elf who used to be engaged to Arelyn's father, but then left the Elven Kingdoms in disgrace and has since become a crime lord.
Ooh, fun.
And he's still got this sort of very twisted, very prickly sense of honour, but is an absolutely no-nonsense... I can't say the word I want to say.
B-word?
B-word.
Right.
Yeah. yeah, he is ruthless, and he's also is a very complicated, interesting character. So yes, Al Shadow is the first one, and then the characters develop. There's 5 books in the series. Unfortunately, that series never got completed.
Oh,
That said, when it ends, there are open plot hooks, but it's it's fine being an open-ended series.
right.
Yeah. And if you prefer, she also has 2 other series, one about dark elves and one about wizards, which, if that's more your thing, those are also well worth checking. And my final recommendation is an adventure. Well, technically, it's not actually an adventure, it's a campaign setting, but it's one that is really laser focused towards writing an adventure in a particular place, and it is the Neverwinter campaign setting for 4th edition.
Ah,
That's right, I am recommending a 4th edition book.
wow.
I always felt with 4th edition, I feel that 4th edition gets more hate than it deserves.
Sure.
And in particular, I think it took a lot of time for the writers.
Maybe we need to do an episode on this one day.
We probably do. I think it was only towards right at the end of 4th edition that the writers really got the hang of what they were doing.
Yeah,
And so the
yeah.
last couple of books, and like the last year or so, are actually really phenomenal. It's just that by then, the entire fan base had written off 4th edition.
Yeah, yeah.
And, not undeservedly.
Mm, mm.
But anyway, the Neverwinter campaign setting is set specifically for the city of Neverwinter in the north of the Forgotten Realms. It's got the different backgrounds where each background is very mechanically unique, but also very flavorfully unique, and gives a character a very specific hook into what's going on in the area. It's got a huge number of different factions which are all engaged in the area as well, all of which are statted up so that low-level characters can take them on. It is designed so that it's basically a giant sandbox for low-level characters to be able to do anything. And so you might make a character and be the lost heir to the throne.
Oh, cool.
That's the sort of hook that they've thrown in. You're not just a noble, you are the heir. Or you are not just a member of a barbarian tribe, you are a werewolf whose entire tribe got slaughtered by another one of the factions.
Whew.
And so all of the hooks that they give are these really juicy, meaty hooks that make you the main characters of the story.
Mm, mm.
There's so many factions that get detailed, all of which wind up covering pretty much the entire scope of what the Forgotten Realms had to offer at that point in time. From the Red Wizards and Thay to the Shadow Wizards from Netheril to Demon Worshippers to Nobles, Dark Elves, tons of different factions, all interacting in the cities based on the characters that you've chosen, the backgrounds that you've used that gives you all these hooks to tie into them. It was just a really, really well-developed world. There are no adventures in the book.
Because you're supposed to write it yourself.
Because you're supposed to write it yourself.
Wow.
But it gives you everything you need.
Right.
That reading through it, you will come up with 100 ideas.
Oh.
And as soon as your characters wind up getting introduced, they will say what they want to do, where they want to go. It's just a really well-developed setting. And it's a setting that's developed so that even at low levels, your characters can become the main characters who can really shape things, who can challenge the movers and players of the area.
Oh, I like the sound of this.
It's a really fantastic book. And those are my 5 recommendations. I have a bonus sneaky recommendation as well, which is Alan Minster's Forgotten Realms. So this got published between 4th edition and 5th edition when 4th edition had been cancelled, but 5th edition wasn't out yet. They gave Ed Greenwood the rights to... They asked him, do you want to write a book about your vision of the Forgotten Realms? And you can put whatever you want in it. And I haven't read it, so I can't tell you whether it's good or not. All I know is I'm very interested to do so at some point. It's just about everyday life, how he imagines the world, how it all fits together on that sort of micro level.
Well, my sneaky recommendation, it's not... Recommendation is too strong a word. I've said before that I'm into multi-user dungeons, text-based online games that are quite possibly the nerdiest thing we'll ever talk about on this podcast.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
I don't know, man. Anyway, so there is a Forgotten Realms MUD. It's called Forgotten Kingdoms. And I've played a little bit before. It was a little bit too rules heavy for me, but they've tried to sort of simulate. I've just looked on their website. They say it's like a blend between Pathfinder and D&D 3.5
Right,
rules.
right.
So they got that. That's what I mean when I say they're going for like real rules heavy. They're going for that
it's
sort of
quite
play.
crunchy.
But it's all set in the Forgotten Realms, and they've tried to be very true to the setting. So that's really cool. That's one of the cool things that I like about it, even if it's not my cup of tea necessarily.
Sure.